it's your instructor, Jason Hartman, welcoming you back to another lesson as we talk about industrial properties. Heavy metal. No, you don't have to grow your hair long and dress funny and join the Motley Crue. But this is heavy metal. You know, this is like the big stuff, the industrial stuff. So let's kind of dive in and talk about it and talk about kind of two different areas of the industrial income property investing side of the equation. Okay, so our learning objectives, as usual, we're going to explore. Okay, we're going to learn the characteristics of industrial property investing, some of the advantages and the disadvantages. And before we get into this too deeply in this lesson, I want to talk about something that concerns me. What I think every investor should be thinking about when they're buying any type of property. And that is the future. You know, Yogi Berra, the guy with all those funny, famous quotes, he said, the future ain't what it used to be. You know, he had all kinds of funny quotes like that. And that is certainly true for some property types more than others. And you can already see this playing out. You can see what I'm about to talk about playing out in your town, in your city. So let's kind of dive into this before we really talk about industrial property specifically. When you're considering an office property investment, I want you to know, and you know, like I always say, people can make money and have made lots of money and great profits in every asset class. Income property is the most historically proven asset class in the world. And we all know people who've become very wealthy with real estate. But then when you drill down to a few different types of real estate, you gotta look at the future, because the future ain't what it used to be. Office space. Think about what has gone on over the past couple of decades. A big movement is called the outsourcing movement. And companies no longer, because of the benefits of technology, feel that it's really necessary to get everybody together at 8 or 9 a.m. until 5 or 6 p.m. every day to be in an office together in order to collaborate and work together. So there's a big move toward outsourcing. And if you've called any call center recently, maybe the call center for Amazon.com, you're probably talking to someone in the Philippines. Maybe a technical support, you're talking to someone in India or the Philippines. And remember, those people used to be Americans using office space in the United States, but now they're offshored and they're outsourced. There's a much lower demand for office space in relation to the population as a whole than there probably has been in a long, long, long time. I know many very successful companies and people, including my own as of 3 years ago, who are home-based. They're virtual. I remember renting big, beautiful offices for my companies, literally struggling to get my staff to come into the office. I remember one of them, we were having a contest just jokingly on the app Foursquare, you know, the app where you would check in before Facebook offered that check-in opportunity. And I remember that she one day said, "Hey, Jason, I'm now mayor of the office because I checked in here more than you did." And so it wasn't just them, it was me too, you know. Working out of the home offers a lot of benefits and a lot of flexibility for people. And there are a lot of great technological tools nowadays that allow people to work remotely very easily. I know my audience here, I don't have to tell you this, I'm just making the point. But this lessens the need for office space. Industrial properties. Look at the offshoring revolution. They call China the workshop of the world. And Apple products mostly, with like one exception for I think one of the iPads, are made offshore. They're made in China at Foxconn. Okay, and so many other products that we use are, of course, made in China. And I know my audience here knows that all too well because some of you probably buy your products from Alibaba or you get them sourced directly from some vendor in China. And so what does that do? What does that mean? Well, it lessens the need for industrial properties in the more expensive to operate Western countries like the US, like Europe, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And then look at retail. I mean, everybody thinks it's easier and less expensive to shop online nowadays. Every single day, except, even on Sunday now, pretty much every day of the week now, at my home, there is a package that arrives that was purchased online, usually Amazon.com, but other companies too. And, the selection's bigger, everything's just easier, right? And so what does this do? It lessens the need for retail properties. And I was just talking with a commercial real estate friend of mine yesterday, in fact, who talked about how all of these shopping centers, they are really having a tough time. The regional malls, people just aren't coming in. And the ones that are still kind of working are the ones that offer a place to hang out and enjoy entertainment. They have a movie theater, they have music, they have stuff that you can't experience very well online. Restaurants, obviously, would be one of those too. And so the strict retail-only type properties, they're struggling in a lot of cases. And then when you think about it, the population in the U.S., and I understand that we have an audience from all over the world, and many of the things that we discuss apply all over the world. But I'm just only addressing the U.S. specifically on this one. The population is increasing, and it's increasing rather dramatically. And what does everybody have in common? They all need a place to live. They all need a place to sleep. And many of them need a place to work at home too, right? So at the end of the day, they all need a house, an office, an industrial space, and a retail property. That's optional. I just want you to think about that. Now, one thing I've got to say about industrial properties is there is a big move that many people are talking about called 3D printing. And 3D printing, I think, will actually bring a little bit of this manufacturing. I don't know that it's going to be too extensive, but a little bit of this manufacturing back to the U.S. It'll onshore it because things can be made custom in relatively small spaces without big equipment, just with fairly small 3D printers. And that's more of the artisan mentality. So, of course, many people will do this in their garage, but small industrial properties will definitely still be needed. And when I talked about retail going to the internet, of course, Amazon.com and all the other retailers, well, they may not have a storefront, but they do have a warehouse, okay? So, there's balance to all of this, just understand that. But I'm talking about the mega trend, the overriding trend. Okay, so what are some of the characteristics of industrial properties? Well, they're designed usually for a pretty specific use. These are usually large open spaces. Maybe they have a little office in them, a little office in front, and they have good power and water, good utility supplies. And they have fairly limited parking because unlike office or retail, where the regulation might be that you need to have 4 parking spaces per 1,000 square feet of building space, in industrial properties, the machines take up most of the space. So you'll have a lot less parking many times, not always, but many times in these industrial properties because so many things are, done by robots and machines now versus in the old days, all those workers, the whistle would blow and you'd see them coming in and out of the building and you needed more parking back then. Okay, tenants tend to be more stable because there's a very high cost of moving. I mean, if you got a bunch of complicated, heavy machines, we dubbed this lesson heavy metal, right? It's pretty hard to move them. And so they tend to stay longer, which is one of the definite benefits of industrial properties, unless, of course, you have a lease that's not very desirable. So it depends what side you're on of that. If you're the landlord, you generally don't like tenant turnover. But if you've got a crappy, low-paying tenant, with a low-paying lease, turnover could be a good thing, okay? So just understand that. Now, there's an important niche in the industrial property realm, and that is self-storage. This is probably my favorite of the industrial property niche. Okay, rental rates per square foot, they're pretty good on self-storage. It's amazing, really. And the maintenance for self-storage tends to be pretty low, and there are, minimal utilities and facilities and no appliances. Let me give you an example of this. I remember the last time I had one of my companies in an office space. We rented this office in Irvine, California, and it was a fairly small office because we were moving toward the virtual company trend back then. And I think this was in 2009, I think. And I remember we signed a deal to lease that space, and I think it was for about $2 per square foot. And it was a smaller office space, so there was a nearby self-storage facility. Now, first of all, before I tell you about the self-storage, let me actually tell you about the office. This was a very nice Class A office building. You could walk to Starbucks, you could walk to many other shops and restaurants, and it was an iconic building in Orange County, in Irvine, California, on Michelson Drive. It was called the Fluor Building. It used to be the headquarters for that big engineering company. Of course, they ultimately left California and moved to, I believe, Texas because the cost of doing business there was so much cheaper. So that's kind of a mini version of the outsourcing thing that we talked about when companies are putting call centers overseas and such, right? But we signed that lease in this very nice building for about $2 per square foot per month. Now, I had to rent a storage space because we had a whole bunch of extra business equipment. And so we rented a storage space near that office. And I remember signing the lease on the storage space, and it was $1.60 per square foot. And it had no carpet, very little in the way of bathroom facilities. It wasn't pretty. You couldn't walk to any restaurants. In other words, those things make it a higher cost, nicer area. There was virtually no landscaping at all. It was unbelievable. It had no amenities whatsoever. And it was $1.60 versus the office that I had just leased for my company that was $2 per square foot. They were only getting 40 cents more per square foot for all of the management they had to do and all of the amenities they had to provide. I really couldn't believe it. It was an enlightening experience. So what are some of the advantages of self-storage? Well, overall, industrial and self-storage, we're kind of combining these two. But in the industrial, the tenants are more stable because remember, it's expensive to move. Okay, so self-storage in particular, high per square foot rents. Industrial that's not self-storage, pretty low per square foot. An example might be in that same scenario that I talked about, the $2 in an area with the $2 per foot per month office and the $1.60 per month storage. An industrial property in that area might rent for 80 or 90 cents per square foot. So it's a lot cheaper, okay? Self-storage can create new cash flow opportunities because you can add on, you could put a little store in the front. And again, this is nominal. It's not going to make you a fortune. But a little store in the front, what does it sell? Well, if you've ever been in one of these, they sell boxes, padlocks, packing materials, things like that. They might have a truck that they either let you use for free or they rent out. But that's a whole different business. And you can scale up and build a big portfolio in self-storage pretty efficiently. Okay, it can be a good way to achieve that economy of scale for larger investors. Now, some of the downsides of industrial and self-storage: high capital costs. Okay, a lot of money to get into these properties, less attractive financing. The good old humble single-family home being the best of all, always in the range of financing, and then self-storage. Remember, this is a business. It's almost more of a business than it is a real estate investment. So you've got to have an office on site. There are a few of these people are experimenting with automated self-storage and stuff. But generally speaking, self-storage facilities have an office on site. You need employees. You need fairly long hours. you've got to do a lot of marketing and advertising to keep your facility leased up, rented, and full, and to keep the occupancy rate high. And the self-storage facility around the corner from you or a mile away is always going to be competing with you, trying to offer lower prices, free first month, free usage of the truck. We'll help you move, we'll buy you dinner, gift certificates, whatever. There's some real marketing that has to go into self-storage because it is a business, okay, as much maybe as it is a real estate deal. And industrial property can be very sensitive to vacancy. A lot of times these are larger spaces, okay, with fewer tenants. You might just have an industrial property that's only one tenant. What if they move? You're 100% vacant on that property. So very sensitive to vacancy, and it takes longer to fill them because they're specific use. It's harder to find this sort of specific use type tenant. I remember one of my commercial real estate friends leased an industrial property, and he looked all around, and this was in Orange County, California, looked all around, and they had to have special requirements. This particular company needed a really high ceiling. Why did they need a high ceiling in their industrial property? Well, because they were building satellites, the ones that go into outer space. and so very specific needs in the industrial property to get that machine to work for the company. So industrial and self-storage properties are difficult to finance when vacancy rates and capital cost, if you want to improve them, are high. You're really going to have to struggle to get financing on these properties in those cases. If they're all leased up and they're in great condition, financing will be easier, but still not nearly as desirable as it will be on our humble single-family home. Self-storage property needs to be, you need organized management. You're running a business, okay? And if you have good business skills and good marketing skills, you can definitely help fill up your properties and keep them occupied. So in closing up here, what are our action items? Research and articulate what you believe to be the best strategy for investing in industrial properties. And you definitely got my opinions here, so you can use that if you want, if you agree with them, and just write a paragraph or two about that. And we've got a template on all of these, by the way, to give you a little guidance on that. And just upload a screenshot, and I'll talk to you on the next lesson.